Welcome to episode 151. And today we're talking about recruitment and more specifically how to run a simple recruitment process in a small or growing business without overcomplicating it. Because hiring can be one of the biggest growth levers in business, but it can also be one of the most expensive mistakes when it goes wrong. So to join me today, I have Dan Moussa from Third Way Advisory. And Dan works with organisations on executive search and leadership hiring. And in our conversation, we unpack some of the most common mistakes businesses make when recruiting. We talk about why preparation matters far more than most people realise, the early warning signs that your hiring process has got off track, and the difference between hiring a superstar and hiring what Dan calls the glue in your team. So if you're currently hiring or planning to grow your team this year, this conversation will give you some really practical things to help with that process. So let's get into it.
I'd like to start with what is probably most recruiters' pet peeve. What's the most common leadership hiring mistake that you see that owners take and they don't actually realise that they're making that mistake?
Quite simply, I think it's a preparation stage. It's that internal alignment piece. It's understanding why exactly are you hiring, what are you hiring, how are you going to do it, and what's the person we need rather than the technical abilities of the job description. That's the most important thing I think you have to get right for a successful recruitment piece. But most of all, it's a piece that's not done, never looked at, and forgotten about. So yeah, to me, it's quite a simple one. Just that preparation piece of a starter process.
So we know that because we work in this kind of space, but why do you think people just still don't do it? Even when they've made those errors before and they've had hiring issues, and yet is it just a time thing? Is it actually just not really understanding what the preparation looks like?
I think it's an element of time, panic, because often someone's resigned or you've won a major project and you have to get the role filled. So you think we have to get this done immediately. So the job advert goes up, it's panic. It's find someone to fill a hole. But equally, I also think it's a real lack of education. And recruitment and hiring's one of these things, and you've probably seen it, is it's always just been done a certain way because that's the way it's been done. And no one's really ever challenged it, or not many people have presented different ways of doing things or challenging ideas. And I often talk about high performance sport as an example, because teams that win, teams that create legacies and have multiple successes, or even individuals, they've all done something a little bit different. They've changed something in their preparation. They've tweaked the way they train. They've gone and done high altitude. They've looked at new ways of doing things to find the little one percenters to get the best results. And that's actually something you can really relate to business as a whole, but I think definitely to acquiring talent and recruiting.
Yeah, absolutely. Desperation's never a good thing when it comes to recruitment, is it?
Yeah, and it's so often reactive rather than proactive, right?
Yes. So what do you see as those early warning signs that the process has gone off track before someone's even, got a candidate in the door?
Yeah, there's big ones. The first one is you're screening hundreds and hundreds of CVs, because if you've gone to that wide an audience, and people do it because they think, we want to cover the market. But if you're whittling through 50, 100, 150 CVs, you've probably been a bit too broad in your search and your advert and your process, because that's too big a number of CVs to actively work through and manage. And I also think it's really hard to make a good decision just off a CV, because what's behind the CV? So that's one of the first red flags. The second really obvious one is we've interviewed 7, 8, 9 people, and we're going to go to market again. Yeah. That means there's an issue, not of a talent pool. That means there's an issue internally in terms of alignment, because whoever is making the decision, everyone's got different needs, different expectations of why the role exists, and probably a different idea of who they want. So unless you address that becomes that challenge, because everyone's trying to hire for their own needs. There's no consistency in an interview. There's no consistency in assessment of candidates. So they're probably the two earliest warning signs that you need to sort of just stop, take a breath, go back and actually look at your recruitment process and what you're trying to achieve, and actually work back from the end goal of who do you want in that position.
Yeah, because sometimes it's actually accepting that maybe it's not the market, maybe it's you, maybe it's the process, maybe
Yeah.
it's, as you said, not everyone's got the same idea of what they want.
And that's always
Sure.
self-acceptance and self-awareness is always difficult. And I think there's a constant battle, right? Do you try and recruit yourself for certain roles, or do you go to an expert and get help? And I think sometimes that's a value if you go for the right partner, saying, well, let's look at the process itself first, because the process itself is always overlooked. It's just you put a job advert up, you interview, you hire someone. It's not really a great process, is it? To have a really specific result, particularly when it's a big investment of time, it's a big investment of money, but equally you want a return on investment. You want somebody who's going to come in and turn it down your organisation.
Yeah. And one thing that I do hear from people is about referrals. They say, oh, we love it when we get referrals. And I've seen referrals work really well, and I've also seen them work terribly because the process goes out the window because I've been referred this person, so therefore they must be great. So what are your thoughts on referral candidates? And I guess that whole idea of just having a coffee and going off gut feel versus having a recruitment process.
I think, and I've been guilty of making those hires myself, and it hasn't always worked. So referral candidates are good, right? Because you tend to getting a like for like. You think someone knows the culture. You've got an idea of probably their friendship circle, how they fit in. But there's also a risk in that when you look at sort of diversity of team and diversity of problem you're trying to solve, because quickly you can just be hiring carbon copies of your team. Now, for some organizations that works because they're very much, well, this is our organization, this is our culture, they own that, and it's fine to own that. So therefore, maybe that's a good way of doing it. However, the challenge is, to your point, you forget to interview, you forget to assess. There's no consistency of what's happening against the talent pool. So for me, I'd always encourage referrals, but I think any referral has to go through the same process as any other candidate in that recruitment process to make sure that you're not missing the thoroughness of the process, or there's consistency in the question, there's consistency in assessment. Because what often happens is, and we've all done it, is great person, lovely personality, gut feel feels good, and you hire them in 6 months and you're like, oh, they're actually underperforming, but they're a great person.
Yeah.
So you give them another 6 months, underperforming still, oh, but they're so-and-so's friend. So it's great, but you can actually create far more issues down the line.
3 years later, you've still got someone not performing yet.
But they're a great person.
Yes, but they're super nice.
Yeah.
So you talked about having that alignment earlier in terms of the people that are making the decision around the role. So what does that look like in practice? How do you get alignment across the people that are making the decision?
I think in practice you actually have to have the discussion, and I think that's often the bit that's missing. So a founder, an owner, a leadership team will agree they have to hire. They'll draft a job description, or if a talent team or the HR function draft a job description, it goes round and everyone signs it off. You go to market, or you brief a recruiter. No one actually sort of sits down, I don't see it, with the individual stakeholders in the formation of that person description and say, listen, we're going to market for this role, we're agreed on budget, we're agreed on the responsibilities, but actually, what's your individual expectations of a person coming into the seat? Now, you might have 2 stakeholders, you might have 3 stakeholders, and guaranteed the answers will be different. And that's fine, because everyone's got their own expectations. But that's a golden opportunity to say, well, listen, before we just rush to market, before we brief someone, let's just look at all our expectations and agree on what we're not willing to give up on and what we can conceive on. Then suddenly you've got actually a real alignment of non-negotiables when it comes to ability, personality, culture that you can assess on. So it's just putting the brakes on and actually asking the questions like, well, what do you think we need, or what are you looking for in a person? It's just a step that, I don't know if how often you see it, but it just never seems to happen. Because it's become, everyone just thinks of a process, job description, budget, market, fill the seat, whereas there's more to it.
And I think often people focus on that, just what do we want them to do?
Yeah.
So yes, we need them to do this particular objective or this particular thing, but they're not looking at, well, what's the kind of behaviours that we need to see out of the role, though? Because you might have 2 completely different ideas. Like if you're hiring a senior sales manager, for example, some person might say, well, we want someone that's going to go and pound down the doors and push people out of the way, be a real pushy salesperson. The other person's like, well, no, I want someone that's going to be quite soft in relationship building, and that's going to be a huge issue, but they're not talking about it. So
yeah, and I often talk about the way you talk about hiring the superstar versus hiring the glue. So you can go and hire a superstar, and you see it in sport. You hire a superstar striker, score a million goals, but pull the dressing room apart. No culture, no team spirit, all about themselves. And so that's great. Listen, the revenue numbers will spike. You'll have no new clients, but actually you're sort of killing your business in the background. Versus now you're hiring maybe for the glue, someone that's going to come in and actually glue things together, stick a team, stick a process. And you're going to see much more. You might see slow returns on revenue perhaps in the first 12 months, but over a period of 2, 3, 5 years, you bought on a far more significant hire than the superstar who will ultimately leave for the next thing probably anyway.
Yeah, and everyone else will leave in the meantime.
Yeah, and they've blown the place up on the way out. Yeah.
Now it's hard to talk about recruitment and not talk about the rise of AI in recruitment. What's your experience with people's, resumes, cover letters, even interviewing, and how are candidates using AI now to kind of try and get themselves forward?
It's twofold. I think definitely people are using AI to write your cover letters, and people are using AI to write your CV. And why wouldn't you? Some of the tools are fantastic. You can have your CV polished. The only thing I would say is make sure you go back and redraft it. Like if you're if you've ever written a CV for 10 years and you need a CV, AI is a great starting point, but you must go back in and personalize it, make sure it's accurate, make sure it's relevant. What we are seeing is, I've seen it more internationally, and it's probably lower level roles. People are using AI during interviews, particularly video interviews. You can watch yourself ask a question, you can see a bit of a pause, you can actually follow their eyes tracking. Now that is becoming an issue. I'm not sure how you combat having gone to like sort of face-to-face interviews, assessment centres, additional things, but that's AI on Teams interviews is definitely becoming a challenge, that's for sure. But I also think that AI is creating almost a victim mentality for many candidates too, because the first thing they blame is, well, my CV's great and my cover letter's great and I'm getting blocked by AI filters within organisations. Now that's a challenge to a degree, but actually I think the number of times I speak to really good candidates and I have half an hour with them, and I'm like, oh, this is awesome candidate, incredible experience, like great culturally, very self-aware, and I get the CV, and I have to say to them, like, your CV doesn't read like the person I've just spoken to. And that's a challenge first. So people can be quick to blame the AI filters, but actually just take a step back, and it's hard because humans don't naturally like selling themselves, particularly Australians, Brits, tall poppy syndrome, and everyone's too humble. Well, actually, your CV, I always say, you almost have to poke someone in the face with two fingers and say, look, this is what I've done, this is why I'm good. So there's a challenge around that as well.
Yeah, and I think I've heard that from people. They're finding candidates that they believe are using AI in the video interviews. And it's tough because it's like the person might be using it because perhaps they're super nervous or English is a second language. But there could be a lot of reasons why they're using it. It doesn't mean they can't do the job. But then from a business perspective, it's like, well, who am I actually hiring?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
that's a challenge.
COVID's got a lot to blame for that, because suddenly everyone was like, well, the screens, like interviews, face-to-face, Teams meetings, it's gone so digital. Actually, some things still need to be done in person. And
it's time to bring it back. Yeah.
I think you have to, or an element, you can have a first stage via video interview, but people get hired for jobs and they've never been to the office, and they've never seen who they're going to work with, and they've never been to a team event. And it's like, equally as a candidate, that's nuts.
Yeah.
It's like buying a car you've never driven or test driven or anything. You people need to give a bit more thought back to these processes. AI is fantastic, and I think AI has changed the game in recruitment in terms of the best thing about AI is it's leveled the playing field. So before, particularly as an external consultant, it was always about who had the black book or the network. But everyone now, owner, internal HR team, internal talent team, external team, everyone's got access to the same tools, the same systems, the same candidates. So it's become a really good level playing field. So now it becomes back to those things of, well, how do we engage a market? How do we ensure we're getting the right person? Who is the right person? So it's almost made recruitment come back to a skill again, if that makes sense. Not just a CV flicking transactional exercise, which for the last decade, it feels like that's what it's become.
Yeah, and I've done a few podcasts actually on my belief that recruitment is much more marketing than it is HR.
100%.
And people sometimes sort of do a bit of a strange look at me when I say that, because in people's minds it's an HR function. It's actually not an HR function, it's a marketing function. And what you're just mentioning is that. It's like, how do we go to market? How do we, show up? What's our employer brand look like? And, often, particularly in smaller businesses, we don't have that skill set internally. So that's where someone like yourself that can do that recruitment process, really adds that value. Because you're selling something. That's the other thing I find, is it's not often seen as a two-way process,
100%
but so much power is with the candidate now.
And I think particularly as you come up the food chain and senior roles, key hires, on the whole, and it's a bit of a broad brush, but on the whole, the candidates you want are generally always in jobs because they're in demand. They excel at what they do. So you have to go and give them something compelling. Say, actually, look, we know who you are. We know your skill set. Just check out this information. We think we might have something. That works really well. But I also see two types of leaders. Some leaders are exceptional at continuing to stay in touch with the market, right? They know who the best candidates are in the market. They meet them for a coffee once a quarter. They always say hello at industry events. They're engaged. So actually, when they have that hole to fill in their own business, they've done the hard work, because they can actually listen, we might have an opportunity, and they've got the relationship. Or when the candidate says to them, I'm getting itchy feet, they're going to find out first. Whereas the other group, who never engage in social media, never engage in the market, and once every 12 years put a really bland job ad up on LinkedIn and say, hey, we're hiring, come and join a great team. Who's going to get the best candidate?
Yeah. And sometimes people think that having a recruitment process is just, it's red tape, it's bureaucratic. So, is there something that you can go, here are the 4 or 5 steps of what a simple recruitment process should look like?
Yeah, I think just to break it up, to me, is just refer it to any sort of sports process. So if you look at any successful sporting team, campaign, individual, once they win the trophy of a competition, in the press conference, you always hear 3 things. We had an incredible off-season, pre-season preparation. There was really strong alignment across the whole organisation, from the physio to the nutritionist to the coaches to the receptionists, and we left no stone unturned in the preparation. Everyone forgets that in recruitment, and we just tend to sort of jump into the season piece, a campaign, and try to hire someone. So just keep that in your mind before you go to market for any process. Have a pre-season, have a preparation stage. That's going to lead to a much better sort of campaign process, and that'll lead to a much better result.
Oh, I think that's awesome. Never heard it described that way before. So.
This makes it more relatable, right?
So it's excellent. Okay, so we've had the pre-season, we've got the trophy, we've hired. What do we do? What's the first 30, 90 days? How do we build trust? How do we build momentum? How do we try and make sure that we're getting our return on that investment?
So the biggest failing, or the biggest weak point in that, I think, is feedback loops. And you'll be all across in your business, right? But generally, what happens is someone comes in and they have a really great first week of onboarding, and it's high touch point, it's feedback. How have you settled in? Have you got what you need? If you're a good organisation, you might have a 30-day feedback loop. And then the next one's at 6 months.
Yeah.
So in that 4 or 5 months, what's happened? How's the candidate felt? Has the role been what we were sold? Have they blended in? Are they struggling? To me, that's too long. So the most important thing I'd be having is that consistent feedback loop, sort of month 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way through probation. For me as an external consultant, I actually encourage my clients now to get me back in after 8 weeks. And we want to sit with the hiring manager, if the HR team was involved, and the candidate, and actually have a feedback session, like, we came to you, we headhunted you, we sold you this business, we sold you this opportunity. Is it, what you're in now, is it what we sold you? And that's just 2 things. One, it says, yeah, you did, it was really accurate, and you can say, well, actually, we've got a pretty good process here, let's refine this and take it again. But it's also, well, if it's not, it kind of 80% it is, but you talked about these values, I don't really see it, or I was told this, told that. At 8 weeks, that's an early enough point to say, well, do you know what? Oh, cool. Sorry you're feeling that way. We can fix it, and you can start to put things in place. But if you leave it to 6 months, someone's made a decision up, right? And actually, they're going to go and badmouth your business and do more damage. I think the biggest one is feedback. I don't know if that's something you'd see as well in terms of retention.
Oh, absolutely. All anyone really wants is to feel listened to.
And cared for.
And sometimes people forget that when you start a new job, it's actually really anxiety inducing for many people, even if you don't want to use that word on it, but it's completely new. And even worse, if, as you say, they've never even been into the building before, And you're looking for all the reasons why it's wrong and different and worse than where you were before.
100%.
So then if you're getting that 30-day check-in, but then you're getting nothing for another 4 or 5 months, that's that whole time to make up all these, what Brene Brown calls S-word first drafts in your head about all the things that are wrong. And so that's where you can just decide, okay, I'll do my 2 years and then I'm done.
Then you're done,
or I'm just going to leave. And a lot of people actually make the decision on when they're going to leave in the first 6 months, even if they don't walk out the door, in my experience.
And then during the 18 months, we're not a brand ambassador for you. We're actually the opposite. Yeah. And I think the other cool thing about if you instill that feedback loop, then that actually becomes part of your culture across the business. So the people you've hired start actually having frequent feedback sessions with their own team and so on and so forth. And you actually create this amazing feedback culture, which is so important.
Oh, yeah. Otherwise, how do you know what's going on?
You don't. And it's amazing how many organizations, we're really good. We do feedback once a year, have an employee engagement survey. I'm like, that's a long time to have no touch points and no feedback.
Yeah, absolutely. The time is going really quickly, but I do want to ask you one more thing, which is, looking back over your career, what's one thing that you wish that you knew earlier about running a business or being a leader?
To me, I wish I'd worked out earlier that people who run businesses or business leaders don't have all the answers. Because I remember being in my 20s, and I think, I was at a big CBRE in Asia, and I remember looking at the CEO, and I remember thinking, like, how do these guys know everything? Like, because they had that, like, how do they know the answer to everything? They might have so much knowledge, but actually, they don't.
Yeah.
They're just really good at problem solving, finding answers, willingness to make a decision. And I think that's the one thing I wish I'd learned earlier, is that you don't have to know everything to be a leader. You just have to be able to self-aware, be able to work with people, be able to build good teams, and I think be able to go in search of answers and take on different viewpoints. But yeah, if only I'd learned that earlier, I would probably just start a business earlier.
I love it. Great answer. Now, if people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way? LinkedIn, website?
Yeah, LinkedIn's amazing. Website, thirdwayadvisory.com.au, Instagram, YouTube as well. We're pretty present, so yeah, but LinkedIn's probably the best.
Awesome. And I'll put the links to those in our show notes along with your podcast link
as
well. So if anyone wants to connect with Dan, you can do it that way. So thank you so much for joining me today. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Likewise, and looking forward to having you on my podcast.
Thank you. And for those listening, if you received value from this episode, I'd love it if you could leave a rating or a review over at Apple Podcasts or Spotify so someone else can find the episodes to help with their business. Episodes released on Mondays, so click subscribe and you'll be notified of when it's available. Thanks so much for joining me. If you have any feedback, questions or ideas for future episodes, head on over to amplifyhr.com.au or connect with me on LinkedIn and we can start a conversation.